Hello and welcome to the show. This is
Hello,
Nirmal.
hello. Hey, how's it going, Brett?
Good. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Nirmal's back again, co-hosting with me. I'm very excited to get to the show, so we're gonna just mention a couple of things real quick before we get into it. If you didn't know, well, we're live on Thursdays every Thursday for 5 years now. So come back on Thursdays if you're randomly seeing this in your YouTube recommendations. Stick around, like and subscribe, all those things. And this turns into a podcast. So you can jump on the podcast. All the links are below. Oh, I got Nirmal hidden there. Look at that. See, we're also amateur hours. So, you know, I always
What
make at
one
least
day,
one
one
mistake.
day in 5 years, one day.
One day we're going to have a perfect stream. And you can get the podcast below. It's an edited form of this. So you get just the guest talks and not all of my ums. And you get the good stuff. We've also got jet noise in the background. It's a fantastic feature of this show. It always happens whenever I live stream. Go Navy. And if you didn't know, I'm in the middle of a live course that is talking all about Kubernetes deployments using GitHub Actions, using Argo CD and GitOps. So if you missed that class and you're interested in this stuff, again, links below in the description. You can go there and sign up on the waiting list to find out the next time we're doing it. Lastly, right above our heads is our Discord server. So we have a Discord server over here, 14,000 DevOps professionals all hanging out. And we have now Discord events. We finally, last week, had our first, instead of a live stream on YouTube, which is also cool, we're not going to stop doing this. We also now have Discord events. We have the first one for Swarm fans. Turns out we have a strong Swarm community. Docker Swarm's still kicking, and they're all chatting away in the Swarm channel and wanted to do an event. So we now have every other month or so, we have Hangouts. There was dozens of people in there, actually. We had to cut it off at 90 minutes in. It was quite a lot of excitement and people. And we had one of the maintainers there. It was kind of fun, honestly. It was way more than I expected, and it was a great time. Sorry you missed it, Nirmal.
Next time.
Next time. All right, let's get to it. You can join that, by the way, above us again, devops.fan. That's our Discord. But let's get to the point. We're here today with Brian Douglas, and we're going to talk about making open source, contributing to open source. I'm excited to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and reaching out. I think you had a previous guest who I was on guest on their show. I'm blanking on his name. I could see his face.
Chad.
Chad,
Right?
exactly.
Yes.
And he brought up open sauce and passing. So yeah, glad to be here to talk more about the secret sauce.
Yeah, and that's where I learned about it. So, from Chad.
Yeah, excellent.
Nirmal, what did you say? Sorry, you were going to say something?
Oh no, let's pull up. Can we just pull up all the main page? It has pizza in it, so we got to pull it up, right?
Boom.
There we go.
Let's do it. There we go.
So tell us more about open sauce. What's it all about? Let's start.
Yeah, so the URL we're looking at here is opensauce.pizza. And what this right here, that we're basically providing a pathway for folks to get involved and make contributions to open source. So like that's the goal. That was the goal I sort of set out to do back when I bought the domain, opensauce.pizza in 2017. And this is a thing that we started like in 2020. I actually added login. But then back last year, we actually decided to make a slight pivot. And if you click here, it's like right under the Explore projects. It's got a little gradient there. This is so just below there, it says maintaining a team. What we discovered is like you could tell people about open source as much as you want. But what you really need is get more people who are maintaining and steering open source, so like the open source program offices or companies. So like we built an entire platform for them to manage and get insights into their open source projects. So that's the platform. And yeah, it's been fun to talk to people about open source on our podcast that we do every other week. Actually, we had an episode go out yesterday with the founder of Stellate, and he was working at Gatsby and started building a GraphQL CDN. So that's what Stellate is, but huge React contributor and created the React boilerplate. So yeah, that's open sauce in a nutshell. Like we're helping folks find contributions, but also helping companies and maintainers find contributors.
That's awesome. There's two parts of this, right? There's the getting folks started, involved, and contributing to open source projects. And then you have the other side, which is, like you mentioned, companies, organizations, open source communities, the maintainers of these open source projects, helping them just keep things going, right? Understanding where contributions are coming from, getting feedback, staying on top of these very highly dynamic, full of personalities, full of different people from around the world, open source communities. Let's start with that first group. What are some of the key insights, and what are some of the first steps you provide as tips or tricks or whatnot in terms of folks wanting to contribute to open source? Both Bret and I, we met each other through the Docker community, right? Which was a rocket ship of an open source community when it came out. And
back when it was only open source. Yeah, it was like early days. Yeah.
Oh, like 2012, 2011, 2013. Around those times? 2013. Okay,
yeah, it was pretty early.
And we've maintained our friendship and grown a really great relationship over that time as part of the Docker Captain community and the open source communities, not only in Docker, but the ecosystem, right, of other open source projects that touches. So we Bret and I don't want to speak for Bret, but I understand inherently the massive positive impact on my life and career that open source has had. How do you help folks strike that same path?
Yeah. And this is something that, maybe it's in the show notes bio, but I spent 5 years working at GitHub previously to starting this, and specifically doing developer relations. So it was always trying to get open source maintainers to leverage GitHub deeply and leverage actions was like my main like go-to-market strategy and community involvement. But the question that everyone has is like, how do I get started, or how do I find projects? And I think there's a lot of really good tools out there, like goodfirstissues.dev, and there's like first timers only, and like that whole mantra of like look in your package.json or look in your dependency tree and go contribute there. But I think it's like kind of like this providing somebody like just a black box and say, just go have fun and do something. And I think that world that we live in with like Docker being one thing, is like, there's so much more nuance and like evolution since there. It's hard to even know where to get started. So like my recommendation for most people is like, don't do any of that stuff. Go find the community and join the community. Cause like the thing is, so this is, I was actually recording some content today about this. Like I played high school football, and in high school football, I was like tall and skinny. Like I'm not as skinny as I used to be, but still tall. And I played wide receiver. So in high school, everyone's a wide receiver unless you know actually what you're doing. Which means like it wasn't first string, second string. It was like 10 wide receivers who got rotated in all the time. And that's how the coach would basically grab a receiver. Sorry, like this is American football for folks who are maybe not in the States. But they just grab a jersey and be like, hey, here's a play, run it in. Because you didn't have the expensive helmets. Like now schools have expensive helmets that have microphones in them and stuff like that. But if you wanted to get in the game, you had to stand next to the coach.
Right.
But a lot of times people think, oh, if I had the right shoes and I have the right, neon signs in the back and have the M1 laptop, I'm ready to go. But in reality, it's like if you join like your community, you mentioned the Docker captains, like join the folks who are doing the thing and like just watch and listen. Because like if I was a plumber, if I wanted to be a plumber, like I'd go be an apprentice somewhere. I'd go find a master plumber, and then I'd be the apprentice or journeyman plumber, and I'd go learn exactly how things are worked, like and do it. It's the same thing with engineering. So like if you join the community and see like the same issues come up over and over again, or this bug was fixed and here's a conversation that happened before it got fixed, it makes it so much easier to approach. Oh, I have a good first issue now.
Yeah, it's that I'm realizing now this is actually going to end up being the episode that I hand off to my students to come through my courses, because they're often new to DevOps and they're often new to open source. I don't do open source courses, but because they're learning all the latest tools, Docker, Kubernetes, whatever, they end up learning a little bit about this and realizing, oh, they want to be involved. And their first questions are often these exact same wrong questions of which project should I look to contribute to? What is the best open source project to go commit to? And
Yeah. And
it's
that answer
it's always
changes
a
day
hard
to day.
right.
Yeah.
It's
So
a
it could
hard
be like
answer.
this answer today, but in 6 weeks or 6 months, I could have said back in 2013, I'd be like, oh, Docker, like go contribute to Docker. It's such a vibrant community. It's so easy to get contributions there. But today, no, not that's the wrong answer. Like go get a
Right.
job at Docker and then you could probably contribute.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that changes with respect to the there's a kind of like a hype cycle for certain open source projects, especially new ones. But at the same time, there are very large, very active, long running projects that have sub communities of interest or working groups, and those are kind of like mini communities that, like you said, just showing up even is like a good first step, right? Just being there.
Yeah.
Um, is that the way to? I think we were talking right before. Of course, some of the
Yeah.
conversation is awesome right before we go on the live stream. But you were talking about how going to the issues first is not the first step. What's that first step?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say the first good contribution is hello. Like say hello in the Discord and like, who are you? What's your skill set? Because I just had again, I'm creating some content because yesterday I had someone come in the Discord. Is like, hey, um, I'm ready to work. I want to do some contributions. I found open source from whatever because we have a discord.gg/open source as a Discord, and I was like, I could answer this question, but there's so much nuance in the answer. If like I don't even know what code you write, which is why like we have profiles. Like when you onboard an open source, you choose your interest. So whatever now it's just languages today, but we'll add frameworks and like DevOps tools eventually. So like you can't choose Kubernetes, but you can choose Go.
Right.
And then from there, you tell us your time zone. And time zone is really important, not because like we don't want like location because that's a little more personal identify information. But time zones are really like, hey, if we jump on a call, are you in anywhere close to me? I can just make that quick decision. I think it's some people choose like set their time zone up on GitHub. A lot of people don't. So that's why we're asking for it. It's just if I'm going to engage and have a conversation with you and mentor you, I need some quick answers. Otherwise, like I have no idea what to tell you. I can tell you what worked for me, but that's not going to work for you. So I just hope this whole conversation back and forth around to say hello and like give like a little introduction. And I think there's a lot of folks probably in your community and other communities that are there just to observe and not really interact. And I think that's okay. But if you're requesting for some mentorship, I think what I've learned in my work at GitHub is like a lot of maintainers are burnt out, and they're burnt out not just by maintaining stuff, and it's not about. I think there's a huge whole funding thing conversation around. Am I funded to do this work full time, part time, or whatnot, or keep this sustainable? But what I'm getting at is like there's just no one to replace you. There's no one to backfill you. And even if there's somebody, there's only a handful of folks. So if I find someone that says, hey, I'm willing to work, and then I spend a bunch of time mentoring them, setting up Zoom calls, and then 2 weeks later, they're like, hey, I can't do this anymore. That's a lot of energy, not wasted, because I think there's some value the maintainer got to sort of find out if there's like documentation where they can onboard people. But there's value that the contributor got. But then that relationship just like goes off in the ether. So I think that it's around validation and trust. Like that's the thing that we wanted to actually solve early days open source, which is who are you, where'd you come from, and if I spend some time with you, like will you stick around? And that was like the question. I made a contribution to Node.js last year, and I made the contribution with a lot of mentorship from some of the core team members. And when I was like, oh, I appreciate you like taking the time and showing me how to do this, and like the way they sort of explained to me, and like not everyone thinks this way, but like with this team, it's like you work at the time I worked at GitHub, and they're like, you're not going to disappear on us because you work at GitHub. We can Slack you. We can find like how to unblock this if this thing breaks for the entire internet. But that's not the same thing for other folks who just want to make contributions. A lot of folks just end up disappearing, which again, I want to iterate. It's okay to like take a step back, or like if you bit off too much that you could chew, like back off. But also I just want to like recognize that if you're putting yourself out there to like get some mentorship and like it doesn't really come to fruition, or there's not like a blog post that came out of it or some documentation that came out of it, uh, maintainers might be a little shy of doing that the next time, which is why my recommendation is like Discord, hello, this is me here to hang out. And then maybe a weekend, like, oh, I saw this come up multiple times. I actually think I could solve this.
I have so many questions.
Go for it, Brett.
Well, I mean, more like there's so many parts of this that we can dive into, right? Like, I think we've all been, especially you, obviously, but I feel like I've got a tiny little bit of this experience of maintaining at least. Most of my repos I wouldn't call code repos. They're mostly, this is how you do this thing in Kubernetes. Here's a very long README with a lot of YAML examples and stuff like that. Or this is how you do this thing in Docker or with infrastructure or whatever. But it being a part of the other repos where it is code and I'm working out a bug and I'm the outsider, I feel like I've seen all the different sides of this where there's people that come to you very enthusiastically, but they have a short lifespan. Like they show up, and if they don't get immediate help from everyone, and I'm not talking about asking for help, but more like, hey, I want to make this contribution. Here's my giant PR with all these changes, and I'm just showing up today, and that's a hard thing as a maintainer, and I don't know how to help them empathize with. We don't know who you are or what this is for, or maybe your PR is a little off from the culture of our project, and it's kind of going in a way we maybe don't want it to go, and and you don't want to say no because these people work so hard, and they care a lot. How do you deal with some of that?
Yeah, and this is the it's really around reputation and recognition is something that we actually currently focused on right now for the next phase of our product, which like. One, you can have your profile and show your reputation based on contributions and your time zone, your interest, but also even showcase like some of your like the actual PR that you've contributed to. But that same energy is met with like if someone knocks on my door and says I'd love to come in and like eat your food, like I'd be like, hold on real quick, like who are you? Like what's your angle? Or even like nowadays your phone rings and you just don't answer it because it's like spam likely. So. Like I just don't pick up my phone anymore. And I think it's the same thing with contributions. It's like, thanks very much for the contribution. And what we've done is we have a PR template, and the PR template lays out in the comment, like in the notes, hidden notes or comments, like, please fill this out. Otherwise we can't take your contribution or we can't take it seriously or whatnot. And it will just sit here and we'll close it eventually. But like the expectation is like you open a PR. In the PR, it says, before you open the PR, open the issue. And if you don't open the issue, but you have a PR, already I know you haven't read anything because in the issue template, it's like, read the contributing MD. Did you do it? Like check the box. And if you didn't check the box, then I know you didn't read it, which is actually, that's not required to check, but the other one that is required is the code of conduct. So the code of conduct's read like there. So like we basically just have like the guardrails for people to like read something and get some context before they ask like the same question everyone asks, which is like, how do I assign myself to issues? Which is in our contributing MD. So like I have a save reply that I quickly respond to people like, hey, can I work on this? And I just reply, read the contributing MD for how to take issues, which we have a GitHub action like .take. It assigns you. So like there's like, it's just basically like I mentioned before we got on the call, like I did sales before learning how to code full time. I was getting my MBA after like 4 years of sales and learned how to code. But in sales, it's all about having a framework. Like one thing I learned like in sales, like most people don't want to pick up the phone. And like 10 years ago when I was doing sales, like it was all phone and email. So I built a framework of like what questions and what prompts to ask in the conversation to then like qualify if this person is a sale or if this is like, it's going to be a dead end. So like with our onboarding experience for open source, it's basically qualifying the person. Like one, if communication is poor, then like the first thing you do when you open up a PR is like go to our Discord, like have the conversation, find me on DMs, like we'll unblock you, but you got to like show some effort to get to that point where you can get unblocked. Otherwise, like I've got all the systems in place of like, I know it's going to be a high touch, low impact contribution. So we'll just let it sit for a bit. And for the folks who have like been around or saw in the Discord how conversations are started and handled, those conversations tend to be a lot more easier to pull through and get merged. So yeah, it's a balance, but I had a chance to talk to 1,000 maintainers, specifically in the maintainer org. I was in the room with the Nadia Ekbal book, Working in Public. Have you guys familiar with that book?
Mm-hmm.
Why
Yeah.
don't you tell our audience more about it?
Yeah, so the book Nadia Ekbal, which I believe Nadia just changed her last name. But I haven't talked to her in like over a year, but I think she got married. So I forgot what her new name is. So apologies, Nadia, on using your maiden name. But what I'm getting at is Nadia actually she interviewed me and hired me at GitHub. We were meant to work on the same team, but she moved on to work on GitHub sponsors instead. But when she was doing the research of like where maintainers are lacking or how GitHub can validate maintainers in the space, the questions, the answers were like the same things over and over again. Like there's just not enough tooling to manage community on GitHub, and GitHub's done a really good job in the last couple of years of adding some community features. Some have been announced and shout up on the rooftop. Some things have been like subtle. But like even like limiting interactions and some like block features and spam features, like it came through some of these interactions. So like in this book, you have the concept of like an active contributor and a passive contributor. And like an active contributor is like, hey, I'm here, I'm participating, I'm gaining knowledge, and I'm growing to be an expert. And then passive contribution is like, I'm just here for the one thing. And there's my contribution. Like every now and then, every 6 months, I find a bug and I'll open an issue. And there's like the whole concept of like, I just had a conversation. You pulled up the YouTube earlier, but I did a conversation with Brendan Burns, who's from Kubernetes fame. And early days Kubernetes was like very similar to that what that book was, which is how do you show engagement and how do you make sure that like the neighborhood, which is your repo, is a place that's fun to hang out and that people can validate and say like this is a nice neighborhood to hang out in. And that was the things that the Kubernetes creators and founders set their project up with the SIG groups, which is if you wander into this corner of the repo, like there's a cohort of code owners that can help navigate you through like this mess of a giant monolith. So with that being said, like basically like issues is a really good, like stars is a really good engage, like to show if people are aware of your project, but it's not the best metric to live on. Issues is a really good insight for folks of interest. Like if people are opening issues, it means they tried something and have questions about the thing that they're looking at. And then pull request shows engagement. So if people are actually opening up PRs, like they're actually engaged and they want to provide value back to the community. So when you see that transition from issues to PR and like sort of that framework that we set up in open source, now you can see like going back to my what I was talking about with sales, the funnel. Like you could see someone started the repo, but you want to go from star to PR. So like, what's the drop off of stars to issues to PRs? And it's not about like over time, but it's like how many stars today, how many issues today, how many PRs today. And today is like not a great time box, but like in the last 7 days, that same number of like that shows engagement and shows how people are converting in the funnel. And like very few people convert from stars to actual PR, but there's an interesting insight there that we're actually working on with our hopefully in the future for our CLI you can just like see that pipeline in the future.
Oh, it's not a sales pipeline. It's more like a contributor and engagement pipeline. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's like a contributor opportunity pipeline.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, it's the and this is the other thing, like when people are like, I need to find something to work on, what projects? Like I always 100% always recommend people small early projects. So like the GitHub Changelog Nightly is a newsletter that shows projects that got like I'm gonna share a lot of the secret sauce. But if you get 50 stars on a new project in one day, you trend on GitHub and almost any other trending algorithms. If you have over 5 contributors, you trend a little better on the GitHub trending. But I guess what I'm getting at is like people want to make contributions and make impact today. So if I don't know who you are, I'll just like give you a random trending repo that I know needs help because they're trending because they just started and they have 0 documentation. And those are almost always the best projects to contribute to because like it's like almost free form. Like you do whatever you want, right. And they're happy to see you. But if you go to Kubernetes, they're like, yeah. Exactly. And it's like, that's where you really like, you get to show yourself and cut your teeth on like building a name for yourself, because what usually happens is that energy turns into more popularity, and that energy that goes documentation and better readmes and better issue templates, like that's what fuels growth for most open source projects. It's just people just know what to do when they get there.
It reminds me of the kind of what the CNCF, the landscape, tries to do a little bit, where they try to show you the health of a project, and of course they have all these metrics, and I don't know what that back-end algorithm looks like, but it reminds me of, I have friends that they have open source projects, and every once in a while one of them will bump into the top 50 on GitHub or whatever, and on the trending page, and they get all excited, and I don't really ever understand how that all happens, and what that and we inside the communities we sort of joke that stars mean everything, but stars mean nothing. I think it was Matt Williams on the show was joking because I told him my strategy with stars is it's like my bookmark. I know that I've been there if I've started, and it's not. It doesn't indicate that I use the product. It just means that I've seen this page before. I've been here and know about it. I just forgot. And
repo read later.
Yeah, and I have a search.
That was the original feature, though. Like if you remember Twitter early days, like the what is it, a heart now today? But it used to not be a heart. It actually used to be like a plus or a save for later, and that's how liking worked. Is you like something, so then you have a list of likes that you can go back to, and that's also very similar to how GitHub stars worked. It's just like you star it. So if you go to your github.com/ your username /stars, you can see everything you've starred recently.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I used to, when I was streaming and had guests, I used to pull up people's stars in this pull up, which is like a really cool engagement thing. But it's like, tell me why you started this repo. Like, tell me about this project. And most people would be like, oh, I started it because this, or I saw it here. And like, it's a really, really good, if you want some like quick little YouTube short content.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like perfect fodder for YouTube short. We're doing it on the GitHub live streams, and then we fell away from it. Open Source Friday is the stream that I kickstarted at GitHub. But yeah, I mean, it really comes down to like you just save it for later. But now it's become something even more. Like if so many people are saving your project, it means there's interest. But very people know how to convert those stars into something of like, hey, I saw you start my project. Would you like to do a thing? Which is, I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's very slimy. I do know some companies are very big nowadays that use stars as a conversion funnel, and their onboarding documentation was basically star the repo like midstream as you were doing you were doing the onboarding guide, and I think they starred the repo for you. GitHub shut this down a little bit a while ago, but like there's a webhook to star repos, and you can like do it behind the scenes. Yeah. Everything's gameable. Like other than PRs, like you can't game PRs. You gotta do the code review.
Sorry, Nirmal, go ahead. I was going to ask a question.
So speaking of kind of engaging from a first time contributor standpoint, what's a way to effectively start that relationship with that community, with the maintainers, and establish yourself as someone that is trustworthy for continued activity, right? You talked about that stranger coming into your door asking for food. Okay, day 2, day 3, week 2, or month 2. What's a good path to establish that trust?
Yeah, so this is a thing that so like I'll tell you how I did it, and then I'm telling you how we wanted to do it for our users of open source. Okay. Like I worked at Netlify 2 jobs ago. I was hired as employee number 3 to build app.netlify.com, which is like the dashboard to deploy all Netlify apps. There was a correlation in like blog posts that I wrote about my time at Netlify and the code I was writing, and like user growth. So like I got pushed more and more like, hey, great job, like write more blog posts, go speak at that conference, totally fine, we'll pay for your ticket. So then I started doing more open source because I was just really intrigued in doing open source, because that's how I sort of converted from sales to getting a job, is through all open source stuff. So what I would do is I would do like just a meaningful contribution on things that I use, like just like everyone tells you to do, like make a contribution. But I would do that in conjunction to doing a Docs PR change. And a lot of times back in the day, Docs always lived on its own landing page. So like I'd open 2 PRs, and like it's like good to get your good for like you get the 1 PR and people are like, oh wow, cool, thanks for the PR. I'll look at this eventually. But then when you open 2 PRs, one for Docs and one for the actual contribution, then they're like, oh wow, this person's actually serious. So like all right out the gate is like, again, this is like counterintuitive to what I was saying in Discord, because I think it's harder today to just to walk into a project and be like, here's a PR. Different world back in the day. But I would just validate myself by doing contributions to places and being consistent and asking meaningful questions. So when I did sales, I used to read, actually, I still read this book every year called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I'm very much an introvert. Like it doesn't show because I'm like basically owning the conversation and doing long-winded answers. But in that book, the way they explain is like you need to have them talk about themselves, the person you're talking to, and which is what I did in sales. Like I'd pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, what's the weather like in Indiana?" Or, "Hey, did you watch the game yesterday?" It's like all this sort of underhand pitch or like, anyway, like this is a bunch of random stuff, icebreaker stuff, yeah. And actually, in particular, like I did that, and I was actually reflecting on this yesterday. I picked up the call, a phone, had a conversation with a person. I was selling IT networking equipment, and in passing, I was like, "Hey, tell me about your local sports team." And it was at Philadelphia Eagles, and he was like, "Oh yeah, so," and like, "Oh, we had this big deal with the Eagles as well." I was like, "Oh yeah, tell me more about this." Like, it turned out what I found just having a conversation with them is that the entire NFL and back in the early 2010s was converting to have Wi-Fi in every stadium. Which was not every place. Like nowadays, you walk everywhere, there's Wi-Fi, but 10 years, like 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. So my biggest bonus and my biggest sale ever was Tennessee Titans. I found out the next deal was the Tennessee Titans, and we got ahead of that deal, and we were able to sell that. So it's, as a contributor, it's like, tell me, like, I need to talk to you. Tell me about this history. Tell me how the compiler works. Hey, there's no documentation on this. Like, can you give me a quick little run through, and I'll write a blog post about how the compiler works. And what turns out is like everyone wants to talk about the thing they wrote. They don't have time to write the blog post, but if they tell you and then you turn that into content and documentation, then that becomes a meaningful contribution. So that's the long story short. That's what I was doing, making contributions and providing validation. Is like I spent less time talking about myself and what I wanted to get out of the conversation or the relationship, and more about what value I can provide back to the project by you tell me about a thing, I'll turn it into content.
It can lead to a surprise, right? You might be going to a new open source project and thinking that the main concern is XYZ thing, and then you talk to that community and you realize, this subcomponent is really where the focus needs to be, or documentation, or just using it, like you said, or having a video online of someone just using the tool for something cool, is much more important, which isn't necessarily captured in an issue somewhere on the repo. Right.
Yeah. It's I think we had a contribution for a hot.opensauce.pizza. In the search, we've got we put GitHub descriptions, and GitHub has short codes for their emojis, and we weren't rendering the emojis, so it would just like render as broken Unicode basically. And turns out there's a library we can add that turns out the person who maintained it saw that and was like, "Hey, I can fix this." So we got the contribution upstream, but it was like, yes, it's a problem, but there's a nuance to like how GitHub does short codes for emojis that we have to convert with, and we were able to like walk into that situation. So like right now, our social cards for all of open source, same problem, needs to be fixed, and anybody can just like jump in there in the Open Graph repo and be like, "Hey, I heard Brian said a thing, I'm here to fix it," and I literally have the PR and the person who can mentor that person to get that fixed and explain the nuance of Unicodes and GitHub emojis and give you a whole history lesson. Just need to have a willing person to be like, "Hey, I'm happy to listen." And I think, honestly, like, again, I'm doing a lot of talking and you guys are doing the listening, which is great. You're getting me to talk. Perfect podcast host. But like as a contributor, like you need to listen and have someone like tell you the thing and take notes and like turn that what you just heard into value.
Yeah, that value is the key. Otherwise, there's a asymmetrical kind of relationship. Like
Yeah.
why should anyone care, right? On either
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like you'll find out that like the test suite is broken, but because there's like a nuanced thing upstream that never got fixed, and you have like the maintainer has a fix but no time. And what a lot of times that I do is like I just copy and paste the code I have in my like local machine or in my local branch, and like here's the code, here's the fix. Like, could you just do it? And that happens like all the time for me and other projects as well.
Yeah. One thing that we maybe touched on, it might have been before the show, before we hit record and live stream, was, at least for me, I have never contributed to an open source project that I wasn't already using and passionate about. And
Yeah.
so I mean, we can all just say, well, pick the project that you care about. It's a weird hurdle that I feel like with my own community, these people don't even know what they're passionate about yet.
Yeah.
They're probably using a ton of open source on their computer. They're probably using VS Code, all open source. Like, they're probably using all these things,
Yeah.
but they haven't found that passion, because I feel like that's almost a natural transition. Do you have any pro tips for someone who's maybe excited about everything but not focused on any one thing yet? Like, how do
Yeah.
they?
Yeah. I sometimes you gotta fake it before you make it too as well. So like
Mm.
it's you have an interest, and it's okay if your interests change. But it's the most important thing is like pick something, because then you can find out really quickly if you don't like it. So like it's again like when when I was doing sales, like you have to qualify the lead. So you ask the questions to be like, is this an actual person who will purchase, or is this a decision maker? And if it's not, like, let's not waste our time. I was actually talking to for open source, we're doing some large enterprise conversations, and there's a CTO of a very very big fintech that everyone's heard. It's like the underlying technology for banks. So don't expose them. But basically, in the email, I got an intro. It's like, hey, Brian's doing a cool thing. This is what they've done so far. Would love to see if there's like an opportunity to work with you and your team. Huge team, huge business. And in the email back, they're like, oh yeah, this is interesting. This is our focus for the next 2 quarters. And like the CTO is up front, and I appreciate that their blunt feedback was like, I don't think it's actually going to be a fit for us anytime soon. Sounds really interesting. I can ask a couple other VPs of engineering if they're interested. But like, to be honest, like, I don't think this is going to fit within what we're actually sort of racing towards, and can't really build an initiative around this. So I was like, thanks so much. Like, don't even bother like asking the VPs. I think based on what your goals are in the next like the 2 quarters, like open source could live and die in 2 quarters. Like, there's no point of me going back and forth to becoming best friends with the CTO of one of the most popular fintechs. So I was like, hey, here's some more context. I'll just follow up with you like sometime next year to see if it makes more sense when we have a better offering for what makes sense for you. Thanks for the feedback. And like, we ended it there. Like, I didn't have to jump on a call. It was just an email back and forth, because I could qualify really quickly they're not going to be a good fit for us. It would just be a lot of time burnt. But it's the same thing of like, if I'm walking into a Rust project, like, which would be random because I don't write really good Rust at all. But then I'm like, I don't know anything about the system engineering thing or what this compiler is doing. I can validate really quickly, I'm not going to be a good fit for this. I'm going to take way too much time from this team to like do anything meaningful. So, like, not that I don't want to discourage like not trying. Like, the counterpoint is like, just go learn Rust and go build projects with it and level up and do like the Rust book and all the other stuff that you should be doing to learn Rust. So instead, like, if you're into, I talk to a lot of front end folks coming out of boot camps. Everyone wants to do React. Everyone's a full-time job doing only React. Everyone wants to do just React components and never touch the back end. And so if that's your interest, like, so be it. But just understand there's a lot of competition for getting contributions in React projects. So like, what if you did the step below that, if like, or a step above, like performance in React and like translations in React or accessibility in React? That's so much niche that there's a way more opportunity for you to specialize and become an expert in that space, as opposed to like, I just want to do React stuff. So I don't know if I answered the question. I just gave a lot of anecdotes.
No, it's good.
That is a good answer. That's that's a good answer for a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
Trying things and finding out that you don't like something is just as valuable as finding out that you are passionate about a specific topic. Another part is I found when trying to solve a problem, you're on Stack Overflow, you're Googling around, and you realize that there's not any really good guidance on how to do XYZ thing with XYZ tool. Like that's the gap, right? Like if you're on the hook for solving a problem and you can't find good guidance on how to do that with whatever you need to, whatever tools your open source communities or projects you're using, well, be that person, right? Be
Yeah.
that person
I mean,
that creates that content.
Nirmal, that's it's crazy because like the default response to that is like, I didn't find anything. I'm just going to move on to the next project. But the most people don't think, oh, I could actually fill in the blank here and write the
Yeah,
thing that's missing. And I think they're like working full time engineering a couple of jobs ago. Like, well, anybody who's listening, you work full time engineering, you run into a library, you use it, and you then evaluate as quick as hopefully as quick as possible whether this is going to work for your need or not. But what usually happens is like people will evaluate project to project to project, find the one that works. But that, like I think when I was doing React like 2014, there was very few Markdown rendering libraries that worked properly, and I tested them all because we had to get Markdown rendered into our application. And I found like it was like marked JS, and now MDX is the go-to. But it was like all these solutions, and they all kind of worked. And what I did is I found Webpack at the time. Their docs was using one of the libraries, so I had like an example I could point to.
Mm.
But then their doc had the same problem we had. So what I did is I fixed it in their docs upstream by doing a contribution to. I think actually Remark was the one, but it doesn't matter
Okay.
which one it was.
Yeah.
But I fixed it upstream and then got it into Webpack, and then was able to validate from my day job. Okay, it works because I got it to work on the Webpack docs. But like no one's gonna, like most people won't do that. Most people are like, it doesn't work. We just can't solve this problem. Like let's just kill the feature. And I think there's actually a blog post on dev.to/open sauce. I wrote a blog post around rounded images, or the rounded solution to rounding images or something like that, something tongue in cheek. And it was because our dashboard, you see all these rounded images, and we were embedding into eCharts, Apache eCharts, and now we're using a different library today. But we couldn't manipulate the image inside the chart library because we had to go upstream to like make the fix. So we had to figure out a solution that required us not to wait for a PR to get merged, but we can ship this. I think we had like 2 weeks or a 3-week deadline to like get this turned around. So we couldn't wait for back and forth trust relationship building with open source. So I walked through like all the solutions we did, and it at the time was when I was like sort of transitioning from doing full-time engineering to just fixing bugs. So I ended up fixing it on like a Sunday afternoon after explaining all my reasoning, all the libraries I tried, how we would fix it, maybe upstream and approach that, even like open it. Like I think another engineer opened an issue on our discussion on the project where we just want to see if we asked a question, would the maintainer respond fast enough that then we would then proceed to actually make the upstream change. So long story short, it was like we ended up figuring a solution, but like we explored upstream options, different libraries, and then ultimately decided to go with Cloudinary, which was the quick fix. But the goal is like to eventually go back to that library and make an upstream change so we can use it the way we want. Which in reality, actually, I think we solved it just a couple weeks ago or last month, where our knowledge of the library, of the chart library that renders all of our avatars, was just really low. So we just leveled up, and we learned how to fix it without an upstream change. But it was a documentation thing. Like that was the ultimate thing, was a documentation change. So I did drop this link when I was talking about validating.
Yeah, I missed it.
people.
Sorry. I just wanted to throw
Yeah,
that
so like this is we haven't launched this. Like it's live, but we don't have any sort of exposure on the other than if you have the URL here. But if you click like with your arrows left and right, you can see essentially different profiles and cards of different contributors. So this is Chrissy, who's doing a ton of Astro contributions. Like for Chrissy's doing like tons of documentation updates for our docs at opensauce.pizza. And I asked one of our team members, like, do you know Chrissy? Like, they're just like making contributions. Who are they? Where'd they come from? And it turns out they were on a Twitter space with us and has continued to contribute alongside of us. And it's been like one of our biggest like non-paid contributors for random stuff. And it seems like Same thing with Free Code Camp and Astro as well. They're just like doing a bunch of helpful stuff. And this is Nate. Nate's the co-creator of Astro, like the technical founder on the team. And but this is a way for us to be I don't know who Nate is. I do know who Nate is, but like you don't know who Nate is, maybe.
Right.
Like you can see, okay, Nate's doing stuff. Like he's made 10 PRs in the last 30 days, and this is all 30 days, and gives you an opportunity to go click through and see his full profile. So like every time someone interacts with me, or we're actually currently hiring for, well, we're not currently hiring. We're exploring hiring next month. It's like we're always hiring basically at a startup. We just didn't know when we could pay you.
Right.
But yeah, so we're exploring different candidates that don't know that they're candidates to get a call out to work for us. And first thing I do is I go check their contributions at open source and see if they have any sort of relationship with anything open source, because of our the field that we're working in. If you have open source experience, it does kind of help you stand out from other candidates. But open source contributions is not required to work at open source. Just want to point that out. But yeah, like the idea is like you could actually showcase your resume, your skill set. So what this feature is called highlights. I can take my PR, provide a brief description about the story behind that PR. And now I have a string of highlights. So in the event that someone wants to hire me for a job or reach out to me for content or conference talks, they have a good context of like, okay, Brian's did something. Let's have a conversation around this contribution that you did. So currently, all data is 30 days. We do have some features and certain features that have 90 days, up to 90 days of data. But eventually, like you can just go back and start storytelling based on your contributions.
This is pretty slick.
Yeah.
You got some good UI designers.
Yeah. Oh, what
we do.
Why is open source? Why contribute to open source? Why get involved in open source communities?
Yeah, and I again, like, there's always going to be someone who's like, I can't do open source, or I hate that open source is the differentiator. Tech was, I say this all the time, like as underrepresented person in tech is not equitable. Like, and once you agree, then we can work to make it equitable. But today, as we talk, most companies don't have very diverse teams. There's like a lot of nuance and hurdles you have to jump through. So like, if I don't know how to do whiteboarding red, black trees, like I can't, as a 36-year-old, I can't get a job as a random tech startup, regardless of like my 10 years of experience. So open source is like the backdoor into tech. By like validating yourself to make contributions to like a random Meta project or a random Google project, like it validates you that you've done the equivalent of what needs to be done to like have to at least get an interview at the job. And I think if what we've noticed in the last 10 years, more 20 years, is like there was a pipeline from Stanford, from Harvard to get people all in Silicon Valley based companies, which is cool. But like, what about all the other schools? What about the people who didn't go to school? If you didn't go to school, but you learn how to code outside of school, like are you less valid? Or if you built a startup and sold it for $10 million, like, are you less valid or more valid? Like, it's all nuanced. And it's because we have we have certificates, but like they're certificates, they're hand wavy. So like you get your Microsoft server certificate qualification, like you can get Microsoft jobs. But at the end of the day, it's like, can you do the work? And can you hit the ground running? And open source shows I can work, like as a boot camp grad like myself, I can work with the team on software that's being leveraged by real life use cases, and then put that on my resume cover letter and share that story. Or I can show I can work remote, because like most open source happens remotely through the internet. So like I got great communication skills. I can show all aspects that usually get asked in the interview. So like what I've been doing is like, I heard this guy at Microsoft. He was talking about a bunch of the diverse folks in the community. I was invited during Microsoft Build this year, and he was saying that he was from an African country that I'd never heard of. It's like an island off the coast of Africa, and he went to school in the States to like make a name for himself. He's got a job at Microsoft, and like everyone celebrated back home because like he made it. He was a big deal, and what he realized is like, and the reason that he made it into Microsoft because somebody mentored him and showed him the way, and he got an internship. But like when you go up the elevator and you like take that job, Like his what he explained to me is like, you got to make sure the elevator goes back down for somebody else. And so like my entire career has always been, can I send an elevator back down to show people this is how you can make a name for yourself in open source. So if you could showcase, like, again, you can work with a team, you've got great communication skills, and you could actually write code. Like that's all the stuff people are checking. And then when you get the interview, the hope is that at that point they just check to see if you're crazy or not, or ask you all the situational questions. Like then it becomes like a easier experience to walk into. So like I'm looking to really just turn the entire industry on its head and showcase open source as a way to showcase your resume, but also make it more approachable to do open source at work as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you for taking that on. Yeah. One other aspect of these open source communities is you realize that it's people, and coming in to these communities, there's some big names that you might see like on YouTube live streams, and the main contributors to massive projects that are leveraged everywhere, or like Linux kernel hackers that are create components that we leverage every day. And it might be very daunting to think about interacting with these folks, but I find that the open source communities, you realize at some point that that's a really good way to directly interact with folks that you might seem like on stage and kind of far removed from your day to day. Is that true? Is that something that you see as an impact?
Yeah, it's so I used to say this thing which is no longer valid. I used to mentor at a boot camp, and I used to say, like, I used to say two things. Basically, if people are like, I don't know if I can do this or whatever, and like, you're not launching rockets. Like if the tests fail, it's okay. Like nothing's going to explode. This is not true if you're literally working at SpaceX. So I'll eat those words if you get a job at SpaceX. The other thing I should say is, like, everything you're looking at has been written by a human, which again, I had to like take that back because not maybe it was inspired by human or learned from a human code that was written. But I used to say it all the time when I was mentoring a boot camp, which thanks to AI now, maybe not written by a human. But what I'm getting at is, like, at the end of the day, is like, this is a solved problem. Someone had to figure this out, and it was like a human with a real brain. So like, you're a human with a real brain. You can figure this out as well. This might take longer, or it could be faster. Like I just think I play music. I played guitar since I was 9, and I've got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I do this thing where I'm just like, hey, tell me a song and I'll play it. Because what I learned is how to play by ear. So I also learned like music theory in college. I didn't go to college for music, but while I was in college, I did a lot of music theory books and stuff like that. So like, if you understand the music theory, like, you could play almost any Taylor Swift song. So if my kids are like, because I know their limitation of music is like, oh, play Bach, and it's like, you don't know who Bach is, but most songs that they want me to play will just be some similar, like, simple pop song. But like, when you understand that theory, like, everything's approachable. Of like, okay, as long as it's like in a key I can sing, which I just play everything in D and C because that's what I can sing out loud. I'm not a great singer, but that's the key I can sing. But if I know the theory, then I can play the pattern or play the notes that make sense to them, even if it's not perfect. Because like, sometimes they have a weird suspended chord or whatever. But my kids are not. Their ear is not as sophisticated that they can hear that.
Right.
I say that with a caveat. My brother, I have a twin brother, and my nephew has like perfect pitch and is teaching himself piano. So that's a whole nother world that he'll probably be like, hey, Uncle Brian, you're a little flat here. Now he's not that good, but I imagine in a couple years he will be that good.
Right.
Yeah. But what I was getting at is everything's approachable.
Yeah. And perfection isn't the end goal necessarily.
Right. No, it isn't. Because like, I think that the best thing that I've done for my career is like, I got a bunch of anecdotes, but I learned in my first job in San Francisco. So I moved to San Francisco, worked at this company called Block, and we had this hard problem with payments and trying to get like Stripe audit logs and stuff like working. And the CTO I worked for was like, does anybody know anybody that works in another company has solved this already? Like, let's just ask them. And that blew my mind because I'm like, oh, we're working at a company that's like VC backed. Like we just like talk to our friends about this problem and like get answers. And the answer is yes. Like if you have a community and you're like, hey, I'm stuck on this problem, like 100% like walk into this Discord and be like, hey, has anybody seen this before? Like, how do I get unblocked? And I think we don't do that enough as an industry. But then the other thing is like every problem has sorry, the other anecdote I would share is I learned that same job. There was like how you pitch ideas and how you get buy-in, like in engineering things, is like they're not the worst idea. Because like worst idea or first idea. And right. Like there was a story that was told to me about producing movies. So like if you're talking to a producer and they're like, hey, let's do ideas. How are we going to open up this film? How do we set up the entire story? You pitch the idea of like, okay, we're going to hire a helicopter. We're going to fly the helicopter from the hills to the ocean, go around the pier of Santa Monica, and then go up to Pasadena to like one park where we'll zoom in from the helicopter to the one person sitting on a bench. And then that's how we open the movie. And they start a conversation like Forrest Gump. So the producer will be like, okay, how much is it going to cost? And they'd be like, oh, it's going to be like, I don't know, $2 million. And they're like, let's not do it. So instead, the producer will say, oh, let's just set up a still camera and open up without the helicopter, start on the bench. And you give the worst answer because you want to get yourself to the second pitch. And the second pitch is like, actually, this is what I want to do. It's simpler, it's approachable. But what most people they want to be able to say no to something, or producers want to say no to something. So like the best thing you do in an engineering sync or in trying to debug a problem is throw out the worst answer. So like when I was solving that rounded images thing, I was just throwing out all the worst ideas of like, hey, why don't we just rebuild our own Cloudinary and like do our own hosting through S3 and stuff like that? And like, yeah, engineers are like, no, we're not doing that. It's like, cool. Why don't we just use this service instead? Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah, it's like it's like you're seeding the room with like they're like, well, they weren't going to say their idea, but suddenly now they're realizing their idea is better than yours. So they're going to throw it out, right? It almost gives them confidence. That I have to admit though, that technique takes some. You have to like let go of your ego and be willing to be wrong, and that is hard for engineers a lot of times, particularly this one.
One thing on that is that we just named the new product that we're gonna. It's like a side project, but I got a 5-letter domain, and we went through a bunch of names of like, oh, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, and I was like, okay, here's a couple of bad ideas, and then like we sort of marinated on it for 2 weeks, and then we came back and like, did we come up with a name? Like everyone's like, no. It's like, I got a name for you. It's like out of left field. I've got the shopping cart open. It was, unfortunately, it's $360 for the domain, which I'll share in a couple weeks. But it's 5 letters. And this is the name of the project. And this is why. And I gave a whole sort of like how impactful in marketing and how people would like remember it in their head. Like OpenSauce.pizza, like we own OpenSauce.com. But OpenSauce.pizza is what I lead with because you'll forget open sauce or how do you spell it. OpenSauce.pizza, even if you spell it wrong, our SEO is off the charts. So like you'll figure it out eventually.
Right. Yeah. It is a wonderfully unique domain, and it's always great to see successful .com domains because a lot of us that have been around the internet for the longest time still think they're all inferior in some way. So it's always great when you see something and you're like, that works for them. And it's not
to be true. They are inferior. It just takes a lot more work to build the SEO, and I still can't email government entities with my .pizza because it just gets. Okay. I've actually had some errors. Yeah, I've had some errors where people were trying to like, I think a HubSpot automation, they couldn't like start because .pizza. So that I know they're trying to put me in automation. I'm like, no, thank you.
I've noticed on some of these alternative domains, like social won't pick them up. If you don't put in the HTTPS, it won't pick up that it's a domain unless you specify that. My wife actually figured out that if we just added www on the beginning of the domain, it will always almost work without having to put in the URL parameters. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of, but we all like to want to. I have hopes. The internet is equal on all domains.
It's getting there. Otherwise, we'll just start searching on TikTok anyway, so it'll be fine.
That's true. That's true. Is the TikTok search in danger of supplanting YouTube search as the second one or whatever it is? Like, Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for being on the show. This has been a fantastic discussion. Honestly, I'm having a hard time signing off because I feel like there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. I hope that this becomes sort of my reference material for people wanting to get in and they're not really sure about, they're thinking technically when they should think of squishy. They should think of the humans involved and find the places where those people are. I love that Discord is becoming more of a standard. I felt like our Discord server for our community was a little early. It was right around the time of when they decided to change the Discord language to allow companies or more than just gaming communities in their verbiage, because I always felt like it was much more community focused and it was safer. It was a safer place for communities. So I'm excited that you have some there. And how do we get to your Discord, by the way? Is there a short URL for that? Or
Yeah, open source, discord.gg/open source.
Nice.
So you find it there. And I did want to mention too as well, we didn't talk about it, but I think your community would probably appreciate our pizza repo. So we built a thing called the Pizza Oven, which is a container that goes and bakes repos. So if you have a URL and you want to get insights from your repo, you don't want to go into the UI and figure it out, we only started like 2 weeks ago, so it's still early days. But if you have ideas for insights you want to get from open source, open up an issue and we'll triage it and put in the roadmap.
All right.
I didn't think, I didn't think this conversation today would make me so hungry, but now I gotta go get some food.
and we'll just throw a bunch of pizza slices on the screen as a way to make you not hungry.
Yeah, it's on brand.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very much so.
So Pizza Oven, you said.
Yeah, so open source /pizza is the GitHub repo, and shout out to Clarkio. So yeah, that is our CLI experience. Like you could also the goal is to eventually be able to self-host it for your GitHub Enterprise and get insights the same way you get on the RUI. But we just want to make it put more tools at the fingertips of maintainers and companies. And this is our effort.
I will definitely be sharing that with lots of groups that I know that are maintaining open source communities. And I think one thing that a lot of folks don't realize is the community itself looks at a lot of these stats to determine what direction to take the community in, right? Like to influence the roadmap, to influence all kinds of things. So it's really important to get good insights into the health of those communities. I feel like we could squander another good hour diving into other topics. Bret, any last kind of takeaways that folks should go check out?
What's their next action? What should they do next?
Yeah.
If anything has been interesting to you and like you want to get involved in open source or you maintain a project, next action is we actually are starting on the 24th, 100 days open source. So 100 days until the end of Hacktoberfest. So the idea is that we'll give you the tips and tricks and tools to get involved in open source communities and how to find them. And the goal is not make a contribution every day. It's not making 40 contributions or get a t-shirt. Like you could do that when you get to Hacktoberfest. We want to educate and just level up how you approach open source. And that's what we're doing for the 100 days. So sign up to open source, submit your willingness to participate in the 100 days, which is just do a thing every day, read documentation, be helpful in an issue, like touch a project in a meaningful way. And hopefully the entire world will be better because of it.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, for those of you who didn't catch the 1,000 times we said it, you can check out Open Sauce at opensauce.pizza. You can find them almost everywhere. They have a channel on YouTube. By the way, your podcast quality, your production value is awesome. Kudos to you, sir. On YouTube, it's at Open Sauce. You're on all of the platforms. You just heard us talk about discord.gg/open sauce. So thank you so much, sir, for being here. I'm excited about open sauce. I signed up this week, started checking it out, and I'm gonna do something there. I'm on both sides of that coin, so I feel like I can do both. Like I'm gonna try to
let's do it. Happy to empower the community.
Yeah. Well, thanks for what you're doing, and I'm excited about the future of open sauce. So for those of you out there, by the way, thank you, Nirmal, for being on the show again as co-host. I appreciate you. We had another great episode in the books. If you didn't know, next week is our cloud native Q&A. So Nirmal's going to be back, and we're just taking pure Q&A on everything you want to talk about in cloud native, Docker, Kubernetes, all the Golang projects, all of the stuff there. We'll probably have to bring up OpenSauce again because we'll be talking about it again next week. After that, we got Dan Garfield coming from CodeFresh in a couple of weeks. We've got Garden.io on. We've got Ufizzy talking about preview environments and GitHub Actions, which is a thing I love. We're going to talk about Lambda and AWS. Ken Collins, an AWS serverless hero, will be here. Talk about Lambda. We got Multipass from. We got a ton of stuff happening. So show back up, future weeks, every Thursday, at this time that you're watching live. And otherwise, there's actually a calendar link or things below that you can click on that will tell you when we show up live. So thanks again, Brian. I hope to see you somewhere on the internet and a PR somewhere. Bye, everybody.
Excellent. Cheers. Stay saucy.
Stay saucy. I like it.
I'm so hungry.